Are you wondering what are the main language milestones to look out for as your child is beginning to turn 4 years old? Maybe they've been in preschool for just a little bit, or maybe they're starting pre-kindergarten and you're just wanting to see if your child's language development is keeping up with what is expected at that age. Hi, my name is Amity. I'm a speech and language pathologist with several years of experience working with children and their families to boost speech and language development at all ages, especially with children under the age of 10. And my mission with this channel is to share some tips and knowledge, especially for parents of children below the age of 5, because that's when a child's brain is developing really rapidly. And language development can have a huge impact on learning and overall learning development in the years to come. So, going back to our question, what are the things that you should expect for a 4-year-old's language development? Note that language and speech are very different. There's other videos that talk about speech sounds, but now we're looking for the content or language. So, with any language milestone, I look at 3 components. I look at expressive language, or what the child is saying. I look at receptive language, or what the child is hearing and understanding. And I look at social language and how the child is interacting with other people, whether it's their own peers or whether it's with adults. So without further ado, let's jump into each one of those. In terms of expressive language, one of the main things that I look for as a child turns 4 is whether or not they're starting to use past tense verbs. So when we're learning about speech and language pathology, one of the things that we learned in grad school was something called Brown's morphemes. And one of the important morphemes or word parts was actually past tense. So that usually starts to develop around the age of 4 and 5. When we think about past tense, there's 2 types of past tense that we are worried about: irregular past tense and regular past tense. So irregular past tense verbs don't really follow rules and structures. So verbs like ate, drank, slept, woke, all of those are irregular past tense verbs. Regular past tense verbs, on the other hand, have an ed or a d attached to the end. So walked, talked, things like that are regular past tense verbs. And normally at around the age of 4, you would want to hear at least a few of each of these. Just your child beginning to explore what it means to use past tense verbs and when to use them. So for example, say you guys are coloring. So say you're using some crayons and you're starting to ask your child what it is that they drew. What did you draw? See if your child says something like, I drew, showing that they realize that drew, at least subconsciously, is different from draw and when they're supposed to use the word drew. Or maybe you can say, oh, what did you do with this one? What did you color blue? Maybe they'll say something like, I colored the sky. That's a regular past tense verb. Or maybe you find a broken crayon. What'd you do with this crayon? I broke it. Or did you clean all the crayons? I cleaned them. So those are things you want to look out for. The verbs definitely do not have to be correct all of the time. So you'll probably hear a lot of eated, drinked, things like that. That is okay, as long as you're starting to hear that your child is very slowly changing the tense. When they're talking about past tense, they're moving in the right direction. And ideally, as a child starts to approach 4.5 and 5, you'll start to see more accuracy with their past tense verbs. So maybe you'll see less of them being incorrect. So if that's not something that you're noticing, 1, just the using of the past tense verbs, or 2, you feel like they're consistently wrong even as they approach 5 years old, that's something to keep an eye out for. Mention to a teacher, mention to your pediatrician, or ask for a speech therapist to take a look if it continues to be an issue. But again, at 4, they're just starting to emerge, and they should be starting to emerge definitely by 4.5. So now we're going to look at receptive language, the things that a child understands. So we talked in our 3-year-old video, if you watched that, about WH questions. So we are also going to look at WH questions as soon as a child turns 4 with a key distinction. So first of all, what are WH questions? WH questions that are expected of 3 and 4-year-olds are usually who questions, what questions, and where questions. So at the age of 3, a child is just starting to answer these questions little by little. At the age of 4, they should be more comfortable with those questions. And if you mix them together, they should be able to answer at least some of the time correctly. So not answering a what question for a who question, or answering a where question for a who question. I'll give you an example in just a second. So I love looking at how a child is answering WH questions during story time. So say at bedtime or whatever time it is that you read books to your child, one of the things to look out for is to see if they can answer a variety of WH questions, possibly between turning the pages. So for example, let me get my friends out here. So here's our pig. And so maybe he built the straw house. So you might ask, who built the straw house? Your child should be able to say something like the pig. Or what did he build? He built a house. And where is the wolf? The wolf is in the forest, or something like that. So that's who, what, and where mixed together. So your child should be getting at least 2 of those 3 correct. Maybe one of those 3 if they've just turned 4, but with time, they should be getting at least 2 of those questions correct. Let me give you a few more examples. Maybe the wolf huffed and puffed and blew the house down. So we can say, who huffed? The wolf huffed. And where did the pig go? He went to his brother's house. Or what did he say? He said, I'll blow your house down. So there's our mixed WH questions. So hopefully your child is starting to answer those, especially during story time, because that's a nice condensed way of checking it out. And the information is something that the child heard just recently. And the last thing that I look for, last but definitely not least, is social language. So one of the things that I look for is whether the child can communicate at least a little what happened during the day, or what happened during a specific circumstance. So for example, what happened at school? There's a caveat here, because as we all know, most children really don't answer the question, what happened at school? They dodge it like a bullet each time. So what's the way to make this a little more specific and check that your child is able to recap events that happened during the day? Ask about a specific event or a specific class or a specific person. So for example, oh, what did you do in science today? Or what did you play on the playground? That's a great way to make things a little bit more specific, but still check if your child can answer with things like, I went on the swing, or I played tag. By the way, there's those past tense verbs. They will come in handy when answering these sorts of questions. Or maybe you can say, who did you play with at recess? I played with Bobby, or I played with my friend. You should be able to get some sort of answers that recaps things that happened during the day. What did you eat for lunch? Well, I ate a hamburger, or I ate chips, whatever the answer is. So you can see that that social language milestone is actually very tied to the other milestones that I talked about. It's tied to the using past tense, and it's tied to using the WH questions. So they're all kind of linked. So like with all milestones, if you're concerned about any of them, you have to kind of make a balance between one, knowing milestones are guidelines. You don't have to be so strict with them and get really stressed out if your child hasn't immediately met a milestone. But at the same time, if your child continues to not meet that milestone, especially as they continue at age 4 going into age 5, it is something to get checked out. It is something to mention to whatever professional you're most comfortable with who is nearby to get any support or help that you might need. So there's our 3 again: past tense, WH questions, who, what, and where, and answering questions like what happened, or recapping what happened during the day. I hope that this video was helpful for you. If you enjoyed this video, some other resources that I recommend are linked in the description box below. So there's our mailing list where you can sign up to receive a monthly tip on how to boost your preschooler Preschool, where you hear is 3 to 4 year olds, language development. There's also an ebook, How to Help Your Child with Preschool Language Development, 10 tips. There's also a course, a parent education course on preschool language development. And finally, some of the materials that I've used here, I will link in the description box below. I hope that this video helped you, and happy talking.